do feel like what I can always say to you and to your listeners is that there was always an innate knowing inside of me, an urge that something wasn't right. I just didn't know how to address it. And so I would say, if you're feeling that way, something's not right, I don't feel normal, you've got pressure, my life is difficult, I'm constantly being challenged, I don't understand this,
Yeah, yeah.
start to ask the questions. Start to ask. Knowledge is huge. I will tell you, someone who's been down this path, knowledge is huge.
Everybody out there in podcast land, thank you for tuning in today to the Journey to Legacy podcast. My name is Wayne Veldsman, and I have a great guest for you today, Miss Beth Jones of Empowered Survivors. They're actually a community helping to inspire and educate survivors of trauma and abuse. And Miss Beth, in our interview, draws on a lot of her own experiences and her journey of healing to where she's gotten to today. Now she's helping other people. One really great piece to listen for in the episode is actually how you, in your current situation, your day to day, can realize if there's something that you haven't worked through that you should be, that's actually holding you back, whether you realize it or not. Beth is actually going to outline for you exactly how to do that. And so I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. Without further ado, Miss Beth Jones of Empowered Survivors. Beth, how are you?
I'm great, Wayne. Thank you. How are you?
I am wonderful. I appreciate you being here today. If you don't mind, just kick us off. Tell the audience just a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself. Today, I am what I refer to as an empowered survivor and a healing mentor. And that is on the backside of a journey that I've been on for the last 4 years, which has taken me through significant personal and professional transformation that I think we're going to dig into a little bit. So I won't say much more than that. But today, it's a result of the journey that I've been on. I am a radically different person from who I was a little over 4 years ago, which is a wonderful thing.
That is such a wonderful thing. Wow, an empowered survivor, a mentor. And I love how you say that based on the past, even just 4 years, you're a radically different person because of sort of your journey. Give us just a little bit of a taste. Where were you 4 years ago before this transformation even started?
So 4 years ago, before the transformation, personally, I was living as now what I know to be a survivor, and a lot of the ways that I was living my life weren't great. So what I term unhealthy survivorship, various coping mechanisms that I had employed and was using to survive in my life. Although I didn't know it, I didn't know myself as a survivor. And although I am a victim of various trauma and abuse going back for many years, I didn't have acceptance for that truth about me 4 years ago. I was also living in or engaged in a professional environment where I was working in professional services and had been for 30 years. At the time, I was forensic accountant and doing a lot of work with companies to help them investigate misconduct by employees or third parties, fraud, white collar crime, that type of thing. So a very busy life doing that. Every bit of that, what I've just said, is now in the rearview mirror for me, and I'm a completely different person today.
Yeah, completely different person today. And it's interesting that, of course, all of our past shapes our future to where we are today. And it's
Absolutely.
interesting that, you say that 4 years ago, you were sort of this, exactly how you put this misinformed, unaware survivor of really what that meant, how you got through it. And so this whole journey brought you to today, which you're now running Empowered Survivors, right? Which is a little bit of a community helping
Yep.
people get through trauma. Tell us just a little bit about that, what you're up to today.
Yeah, so it's a mission that's come out of the healing journey that I've been on, and it's clear to me that the work I'm doing now and will do in the future around empowered survivors is ultimately what my life's purpose is about. So I had to go for 50 years as a victim and a survivor to have that experience and then to spend 2 years with one of those years deep, deep, deep in a healing journey, a difficult, very difficult healing journey, to understand myself as a victim, as a survivor, but more importantly, as someone who's walked the hero's journey and overcome those challenges to be the empowered survivor is how I refer to myself now. And that, that 50 years had to happen in order for me to do my work to help other survivors of trauma and abuse to get through the healing process themselves. So that's really what my work is about, my life is about, and now my work is about is inspiring and mentoring other survivors to walk their pathway.
That is
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
great. Like I said, it took 50 years, but now you're finding your life's purpose. You went through this really
Hmm.
deep, deep, healing journey. Um, and now you're an empowered survivor,
Hmm.
helping others as well.
Yeah.
If you were to think back, let's not even take it too far back, 5 or 10 years ago, what would you at that point have guessed that you would be doing today?
Um, at both of those points in my life, I probably would have told you that I was living in what I believed to be my life's purpose and doing what I thought I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. It's interesting that the whole notion of purpose. One of the things that I went through and have gone through, and I still engage in this on a regular basis as part of healing, because I believe as beings, human beings, we're always healing, we're always evolving, always growing, always transforming. But I spent a lot of time in self-discovery, and not quite as deep as it's been in past years now. But my life's purpose was something that I really struggled with for a very long time. And so even 10 years ago, I had already begun that struggle to try to really figure out what my life's purpose was. And I was coming from a place of frustration about what I could see and what I was experiencing at the time, and what I thought my life's purpose was based on what I could see immediately around me. And it was very dissatisfying for many years, right? So,
Wow,
5 or 10 years ago, I would have told you, I think this is it, but I'm really dissatisfied with this place that I'm in right now. It doesn't feel
interesting.
like it's me. It doesn't resonate, right? It's not mine. I don't own it, right? I feel like there should be more, is what I would have told you.
Huh. So it sounds like despite this fact that you were dissatisfied and like feeling there was more, at the same time you were feeling that you were almost in your life's purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did some research recently, and I was looking back at some old journals and something that I had written actually in 2014. And it was a piece that I'd written back then called Life Disrupted. And it was just what I was dealing with at the time about how I felt about my life. And there is a section in there that specifically is on this topic about my life's purpose. And I had written there like how dissatisfied I was with everything that I could see around me. And I would be like, really? I was like, universe, God, is this it? Like, this is all I meant to do with my life?
Wow.
And really, really had that feeling even back then. Yeah.
Wow.
And
It's
had no idea that he was going, just hold on, because it's going to get better, right? We're going to fast
yeah.
forward 10 years and it's going to be all good. You're going to know what your purpose is. But I had no idea back then, right? No
No,
idea.
of course, right. When you're in that moment, of course
Mm.
you don't know. I'm curious as to it's interesting. I've never heard this perspective before of like where
Oh.
you're feeling like this is your purpose,
Mm.
your meaning, how because you're helping a lot of people, right?
Well,
But
back then I wasn't. Back then I wasn't, right? So back then my life was entirely, actually back then my life was entirely focused. Well, let me say this. So yes, I was helping people in a sense in my corporate world, in my
yeah, because you were
professional.
a forensic accountant.
Yes, and then
Yes.
I was, I mean, the title of your podcast, right? Journey to Legacy. I mean, I was leaving legacy back
Yeah.
then, and I worked on some, the company I worked for, and some of the cases I worked on back then were headline cases, and some of the big, I mean, you would know them if I told you, right? They were big headline cases around various accounting scandals and bribery and corruption cases and things like that, right? So I was
Yeah.
leaving legacy in the work that I was doing to help the companies overcome that and to become better corporate citizens. And I did have satisfaction in that, right? But I didn't really see that as my life's purpose. So that was, I'll tell you now, that was a mask that I wore, right? And it was
Uh,
a mask.
uh,
I was comfortable wearing that mask, and it actually helped me through all of those years. At a
uh,
professional, on the personal side of me, though, that's where the struggle with life purpose really challenged me because I knew what I was doing professionally. I wore it well. It felt comfortable, but it didn't fulfill me in terms of really like my life. This is me. This is my life's purpose. It didn't fulfill me that way. And at the time, I was married back then, and my ex-husband was somebody, he's also a survivor and a lot of challenges and struggles in his lifetime. And at the time, the only thing that I could see is that my purpose in life was to get him through his life. And that was
oh, wow.
very dissatisfying for me. I was like,
Sure.
how can this be? And from a life purpose standpoint, at that time, I would say to you, I didn't even really appreciate that what I was doing professionally was amazing and
Uh-huh.
creating legacy
Oh,
and great
wow.
work that I
Wow.
was
Wow.
doing, but it didn't fulfill me from a purpose,
Wow.
a life's purpose standpoint, right? And I haven't ever
Yeah.
been in that place until now recently with the journey part of my journey that I'm on now and the work that I do with people now.
Yeah, now like your personal and your professional side are actually lining up,
Yes,
right?
that's
And being
exactly
much
right.
much more fulfilling. You
Yes,
you
yes.
meant you mentioned then, right? Like your professional side was doing great. You were helping a lot of companies, really big cases. It's funny that you also mentioned that at that time you couldn't really see it. But what I find interesting is you said you feel like you almost had a mask on, right?
Yeah.
We try and be give people a lot of actionable advice in the show, right? Do you think looking back there was a sign which like looking back now you're like, wow, I should have realized it because of that right then and there that I wasn't doing the correct thing or I needed to make an adjustment?
It's a great question, and I get this question a lot. And the first thing that comes to mind, the way that I'm going to answer this is to tell you is that I am not a should have, could have, would have person. I don't look at life that way.
Yeah.
So my life path that I've been down was by design, is by design. I've always been divinely led. I understand that my life had to be what it was in order to be what it is now, right? And I think that's true for every single one of us. Um, you know, there are things like, I was married for 30 years and I probably stayed in that marriage at least 10 years too long. I understand why. So I've done a lot of those types of things where could I've done something different? Should I have seen something earlier? What did I miss? Of course, I'm human, and like all of us, I've had those questions in my head, but I've used those as part of self-discovery. And because I don't live in this could have, would have, should have state of thinking, for me, it's really about understanding myself and giving myself grace for and acceptance of what I have been in the past. And, I mean, that gets down to, I mean, we're talking about this in terms of the mask that I wore that was my work, but I wore some ugly masks at different points in time in my life in this realm of what I call unhealthy survivorship. So not some great things that I have done in my life in the past. And even those things that naturally you can have regret for, and I wish I never would have done that, and X, Y, and Z, even those things for me are things that I've accepted about myself because I am a survivor. And I understand that's where that behavior was coming from, was a place of survivorship. And I'll also tell you now that I know I couldn't have done anything different back then because that was my life's path. And I
It was
truly believe it.
I love that mindset, Beth. It's so interesting. I had a very similar conversation at lunch today
Hmm.
because a much smaller example, I had a sales call yesterday that I feel like I just butchered, right? And then this morning when I was like, oh man, like what could I have done differently? What should I have? And then of course it clicked into my head of no, you can't change anything in the past. You
Yeah,
walked through that for a reason. What can we learn from it? And what actions can we then change
exactly.
from it, right?
That's
So
exactly right.
I totally agree with you, right? And so I believe that's true for every single person in the world. But
Hmm.
my question stems toward, well, what can maybe right now somebody is listening
Yep.
that this is now meant in their path to be a pivot, right? Learning
Yeah.
from you, learning from your story. So not what would have you done, what would have you done differently, but what could they maybe try and realize in their life currently that is maybe a sign that they need to make change or some more self-discovery?
Well, so I believe that for each of us that ultimately gets on the healing path and has the opportunity to heal and to make these changes, there is pressure on us. Um, Sometimes I think of it as like building pressure that's coming from whether you want to, I'm very spiritual, so whether you want to call it God or the universe or a higher power, it's coming from inside of you, wherever it is. I think the challenges that we experience in life are those pressure points building on us. And it's how we respond to those that move us in the pathway of growth and
Mm,
personal
mm,
transformation, right? And so many times we have that pressure on us and we just ignore it. We just keep bumbling through life and not really addressing what the problem is. But if you can get to the point where you realize either I don't have to live my life like this anymore, or something is very wrong here, something inside of me doesn't feel right. When you recognize that as a pressure point, that's your opportunity to engage in this, what I call this process of self-discovery. And it's, the word heal for me means to hope, evolve, and love as actions, right? And for me, the evolve part of that is the big piece. And when we evolve, there are two main parts to that. The first are the tools that we use to help us engage in a healing process. And that's everything from knowledge to therapy to creative
mm.
outlets to wellness, or so many pieces that come together
Lots of
to help us
tools.
as we're healing. Then there's also this process of deep self-discovery. And it's when we get to that point where the pressure mounts enough and we're tired of feeling the way that we feel because we're carrying burden, we're constrained, our body, our heart really is constrained by what we're carrying. And it's when we get to that point where that pressure has tipped or it's just become immense enough and we're like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And it happens in so many different ways. I mean, for me, it was a hypnotherapy event that was my tipping point. But, other people, I think sometimes what we hear is referred to as rock bottom, right? You've hit the rock bottom in
Absolutely.
your life. Something
Right.
has happened, right? And that pressure has really, right? So there's so many different ways that it happens for people, but it's recognizing that pressure is there and then responding to it in a healthy and productive way. Mm.
Great. That of course they're responding to it in a healthy and productive way, right? And how you're saying you're going to start to realize these pressure points.
Mm.
I have tons of guests. I have tons of conversations where we people talk about hitting rock bottom, and it's like a never-ending question of, well, how can we make sure people don't hit rock bottom? Let's
Yeah,
make
well,
change happen before that, but it's not easy.
and I would love that. And I mean, that would really be ultimately the mission that I would be on. But the truth is that trauma and abuse are human conditions, and every single one of us have
Mm,
experienced it and will experience it. And
mm,
it's an understanding about what that means and what is trauma, what is abuse. But I mean, I can tell you it's a human condition that we're all going to experience, and most of us at this point in our life, where I am, have experienced it, and
yeah,
sometimes in multiple forms. Survival is also a human condition. It's the flip side of that, right? And the way that we respond to trauma and abuse is how we're surviving, right? And that's where sometimes the way that people respond to it is, I mean, for me, it was awful things that I did to myself and the way that I lived my life. And that happens for a lot of people. And that's where that notion of rock bottom and like it's like a boat anchor pulling you down, right? And if we could just,
yeah,
for me, one of the beautiful things about going through the healing processes that I've gone through is a level of resiliency that I have now. And so when I encounter things that are traumatic or even maybe in the realm of abuse, just dissatisfying or painful human to human reactions, I can respond so much quicker now because I've learned
nice.
how to do this, right? And that's what I would hope is that, at some point in time, I personally would love to be in a place where I'm like, oh, I know exactly what that is. I'm not reacting. I'm not having any kind of a negative reaction, which is kind of what you're talking about, right? Never
Sure, sure, sure.
experiencing that path. But I think it's, from my perspective, sitting here today, I think the best that I can hope for and what I would say to people is to be able to recognize it when it's happening. And when you're reacting in a negative way, to see that much more quickly and to be able to alter that so that you don't carry that and wear it with you anymore. That's what I hope for myself. Yeah.
Great. Love that. What you hope for yourself is basically being able to see situations as they happen, understand that you don't need to react in a negative way at all, and
Yeah.
adjust almost instantaneously is the
Yes.
idea. And how you respond is
Crossing my fingers.
fingers crossed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
so is
Yeah.
that, it sounds like that's a big piece here in this healing journey, or when trauma and abuse happens. It sounds like it's almost how we respond to it is the
Yes.
biggest piece.
Yeah. And yes. And I think that's absolutely the truth. And, how we respond to it, on a scale of healthy to unhealthy, right? And trying to get to the point where where we're on the more healthy side of that. I think the problem, my experience, I mean, I experienced this personally, and when I talk to people
Mhm.
now, there's a tendency to focus on the trauma and the abuse, and there's a tendency to um, want to be the victim. And I think that's where we
Interesting.
get hung up in a lot of times in our ability to move forward. And I don't, when I talk to people, I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to tell you in this conversation we're having what I've experienced, because I don't
Yeah.
care to, I don't need, I mean, I can talk to you about it like my hair is brown and my eyes are green factually about me, but I don't need to, because the important part of what I know about trauma and abuse is the healing. That's the important part of it. If you've experienced it, you are a survivor. How you survive comes in all shades of gray. The important part is healing from the gray. That's really what we have to do, what we need to do. That's where the focus should be. And that's my message that I'm trying to share with people. Yeah, the healing
Allow the
part.
focus to be on the healing part,
Yeah.
not as much the actual trauma that
Yes.
happened,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I I love that so much. I have experienced, and like a lot of the times in these podcast episodes, I end up asking questions selfishly for myself. And so forgive me.
So the learning process, right?
I have wondered in my own life if I sometimes just ignore problems, or almost ignore, let's say, traumas, depending on, of course, there's a massive scale here for what traumas are. And that seemingly is my way of almost quote unquote dealing with it, right? But I feel like I'm missing something here that
Oh,
it doesn't seem very healthy.
oh, no, you're not. You're not missing anything. You're actually acutely aware of what you're doing. It's exactly what I used to do. So I think I said hypnotherapy was the event that I had, was the
Yeah,
life
you
offer.
mentioned it briefly.
So yeah, so one of the things that I discovered very quickly post hypnotherapy is that I lived behind a wall that was 45 years tall and 45 years thick. That's how I described it. And that
Okay.
wall was built of all of these things that happened to me, that I shoved the event and the emotion into a box, stuck it in a brick in the wall, and just let it build and build and build and build around me until it was really constraining me, right? And when I woke up and could see it and knew that it was there, I was in a very lonely and alone place because I was trapped behind the wall. People couldn't get into me, but the worst was that I couldn't get out past the wall. So I spent
Interesting.
a year tearing it down. And what does that mean? That means facing what I had been through, and really more than anything, facing the emotion. So I suffer from dissociative amnesia, and a lot of times just don't record what's happening to me at all. And I've done that for the vast majority of my life.
Okay.
So I was stuck with a bunch of emotion inside of me. So even
Yeah.
like the events that created that emotion, a lot of that, the detail of it is missing, is not there. And so I was just encumbered by this heavy, heavy amount of emotion. It was awful. And really, I was in a place where my heart was completely bound up by the emotions that I had. And I didn't, being able to engage in really deep, meaningful relationships with people was almost impossible for me. And that is a limitation on being able to actually know love, to give and receive love in healthy relationships, because I was so bound up in my own emotion that I'd shoved inside of me, right? I had not ever
Wow.
processed it. I had just ignored it, as you say, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, that doesn't work too well, right? And my
No,
experience was awful.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, obviously. Where's like the line of, because we said earlier, right? You don't want to put focus on the traumas, right? You want to do the focus on the healing. Where's
Yeah.
the line, or how can people understand if they are ignoring a past trauma or if they have simply accepted and let it go already? Because like those things are similar in my mind.
Yeah, I think that has to do with the emotional state of being that you're in with respect
Mm,
to that particular event and then overall, right? And so, the only, one of the only vivid memories that I have um, in my life, good or bad, has to do with the first time that I was abused. I was 5 when it happened, and I have a very
mm,
vivid memory of that event. And that one I've spent a lot of time. That was the first. It was my grandfather, and it was the
mm,
first really seriously hurtful relationship in my life that I had to heal. And I know I have healed that because of where I am emotionally with respect to how I think about him and how I feel about him in the relationship. Now he's dead, which is interesting, and he died before I even went through this process that I've been through, and so
mm,
I've done a lot of that healing at the spiritual level or within my soul,
mm,
and
mm.
perhaps maybe involving his soul as well. But I know, he used to literally, I mean, his eyes held fear over me. So when I would think about him and I would picture him and I would see the eyes, I would become scared, terrified, even, years after he's dead. And I'm, was in my early 50s at this point in time. And I would
Mm.
literally feel that fear. And I've gone through a progressive healing process with respect to him. And so now when I think of him, his eyes hold no fear over me anymore. And so I really think it comes back to the emotion that we're carrying, right? And so are we heavy? Do we have anger? Do we have hate? Or are we on the lighter side? And I'm never going to tell you that I'm joyous about him, right? Because he did
Sure,
some really
sure, of
awful
course.
things and did a really awful thing to me, right? So I'm not going to ever tell you that. But I also don't feel heavy, or I don't have hate. I don't have anger. I don't carry any of those kind of emotions with respect to him. He's just sort of
Mm,
in this neutral plane of somebody who was in my life and had a profound impact on my life. And of course, now I will tell you that profound impact is for good, right? So he
yeah.
created some bad in my life, but I'm doing good with that now. So I think that's partly, and maybe that's a lot of how you know where you are with respect to those things that happen to us.
That's so interesting. So I think you're spot on. I love how you put it that it's the emotions that go with it, right? And there, right at the end, you even said that looking back at it now, you obviously you're not happy about it, but you accept it and understand that that has actually helped to bring you to where you
Yes.
are and helping with what you are doing today.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
ear
Yeah.
Earlier, when you said, right, that you have somewhat of a little bit of, amnesia, right, where you don't remember specific events that necessarily happened, right? I'm relating that to how can people understand that they might have traumas that they're not dealing with from things that they don't even remember, they don't even realize, but maybe, I mean, is it just the emotions? Like, I'm understanding that, okay, I have this constant anger and constant sort of hatred for the world and for people. Does that mean that I have a trauma that I haven't dealt with? How can I almost bring these things back to the surface and realize I need to deal with my past?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that, it goes back to that pressure point that I was making
Mm,
previously, where you
yeah,
feel pressure or some kind of discomfort in your being. Something's not right, and you might not be able to put your finger on it, but it's not right. And I experienced that for many, many years before I really got the opportunity to heal, and including that I tried to get therapy and help for like 25 years and never could find anybody who could help me, and I could never explain to anybody because I didn't know, right? But I look
sure.
back over my life, and there are things now that I know, and I think this is where when people hear me talk about this, you kind of get a little like, is it the cart before the horse? What happens here, right? Because one of
Yeah.
the things that was huge for me was knowledge. And when after the hypnotherapy event, really quickly, some events that happened immediately after that, I found myself with this insatiable thirst for knowledge to understand what I used to call my condition, right? And things that
Uh-huh.
I was beginning to recognize about my life that weren't normal, whatever that even means. And I'm using
Sure,
air
of
quotes. If
course.
you're
Air
listening to this
quotes.
and don't
Yeah,
see it
yeah.
about normal, whatever that word even means. But I'll give you an example. So, with respect to the dissociation, right? I discovered that word after the hypnotherapy when I was sharing with two of my really close friends what had happened to me in the hypnotherapy and some things that I had already begun to piece together about my previously in my life. And with respect to dissociation, for years, I could engage in a discussion with you that was at the conceptual or definitional level of what is dissociation or dissociative amnesia. It had to do with my memory. So when I would engage with the conversation with you, it would be a very curious conversation, me picking your brain, really wanting to understand when you're remembering an event, what is happening up here? Like, what does it look like in your head? What are your senses doing? Right. I was really very curious about that because for me, it was void. Absolutely nothing there with I mean, even my wedding day, like big things that you're like, oh, of course you're going to remember that. Completely gone for me. And that always had me in a quandary about like, why is that? And then I'm explaining this to one of my friends on the backside of explaining to her what had happened in my hypnotherapy session and what I had begun to piece together about my life. And she used those, she's like, that's dissociation. That happens to people who are traumatized. And it was that progression of words that my eyes are like getting bigger. And I'm like, oh, like the light bulb is literally coming on as these things are being said to me. And then I start reading and I discover this wonderful term, dissociative amnesia. And what the guy's writing about is exactly what I'd been talking about for 15, 20 years to people, right? So it was that's what kind of where I get the cart before the horse thing, right? Because I sort of knew, but I didn't know until I got this word, right? Until I got educated a little bit about what was happening. But what I would say about all of that is that there was an innate inner knowing in me that something was not right. Right. So I know, I mean, I tried to go to therapy for 25 years. I'm engaging in these very contorted discussions about memory. There's another term out there for people like me who do this, who cut their family off, called a parentectomy. And I had done that. I had exiled my parents, and I could explain that to you and I could tell you all day long about that, but I had never put it in the context of I did that because I'm a survivor. I never had put that together. So that it is cart before the horse, and I do recognize that, which
Yeah,
comes first,
yeah,
or
that's
the egg,
good.
right? But I do feel like what I can always say to you and to your listeners is that there was always an innate knowing inside of me, an urge that something wasn't right. I just didn't know how to address it. And so I would say if you're feeling that way, something's not right, I don't feel normal, you've got pressure, my life is difficult, I'm constantly being challenged, I don't understand this,
Yeah, yeah.
start to ask the questions. Start to ask. Knowledge is
Uh,
huge. I will tell you, someone who's been down this
knowledge is
path,
huge.
knowledge is huge. Yeah.
Unbelievable. I really couldn't agree with you more, right? Obviously, knowledge power. And the whole cart, you put the cart before the horse. But at some point, we have to realize, like, start to look for answers.
Yes.
As simple as that, right? If you're having ideas, inclinations, even just if you're generally curious, like right now, I'm sitting here curious. I'm like, man, are there past memories that I'm suppressing? Like how in tune with my past, like thoughts, memories are my emotions? And it's starting to make me question, like, you know what? Maybe, but the actual factual answer just is go towards more knowledge, right? Start
Yes.
learning about
I
the
think that's
subject
right.
more and more.
I think that's right.
And
Yeah.
so,
Don't be
so
afraid to
where
question.
don't
Yeah.
be
Don't be
afraid.
afraid to question. Yeah. And I think we're afraid to question because we're afraid of what the answer might be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as you mentioned also, right? People earlier, you mentioned people like to be the victim. Honestly, they like to sit in that victim mentality. And so when people are starting to question, right, and they're starting to look for knowledge, maybe take us a little bit more to sort of present today, even with your business Empowered Survivors. Where is somewhere you can point people to start looking for knowledge, looking for more answers?
So for me, it was reading. That was the biggest part of the knowledge acquisition was in reading. And and I guess probably where it started, actually, the reality of that is talking. And so I was not, after I took the initial step of speaking my truth about what I was experiencing, and I did it with
Mhm.
very, very close friends of mine. It was actually, when I talked before about, touched briefly on, the notion of love, and that's ultimately what this is about, is unconstraining your heart so that you can actually really, really know love. That started for me with two women who were colleagues who had become friends that I would spend time with on the weekend. We'd sort of started to delve into, I guess you would say, deeper level conversations. But what I experienced in the hypnotherapy, I mean, it went to a whole new level of deep very quickly. And I had to summon the courage to tell them about what I was experiencing, which I really couldn't explain. I mean, I was searching. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, I was scared. I was really scared because
Mm.
I didn't know who I was, and I was really scared about the unknown because I knew there was a lot of unknown, but I was scared about that. But I had to start, and so that was where I started, was finding two people who I felt comfortable to at least start the process of talking about whatever I could
Sure.
talk with. And that was just a path that unfolded before me that led me to some wonderful places. But the two biggest next stops after that, right? And I needed somebody to tell me this is probably what's happening. And, it's
Yeah.
part of this amazing journey that I've been on, this beautiful path that I've been on. But one of the women who I first told had been a prosecutor in early days of her career, and she had prosecuted child sexual abuse cases, which is what I was dealing with at the moment. That was the
Sure.
initial abuse when I was 5 that I was dealing with at the time. And so she knew. I mean, she was a godsend to me because like she was like, I know exactly what's wrong with you and what's happening to you, right? And so she, in a very loving way, sent me down the path that I needed to get help, right? So I
Mm.
was traumatized, abused, dissociation. She's using words that were familiar to her, completely unfamiliar to me, but they sent me
Of
on a
course.
search. So I'm on Google literally like the
Right.
next morning searching these terms. And this is when I start to find books that I've now read. I found my trauma therapist. I found a support group for survivors, female survivors of either sexual abuse, either as a child or an adult, right? And so I found some amazing resources, but that is all in the vein of knowledge acquisition. And even my trauma
Yeah.
therapist, right, doing the
Yeah.
work to get to someone who could actually help me. She also helped me a great deal with knowledge and sent me down the path of some other books that I've read, right? So I
Yeah.
talk about knowledge as a precursor to like really accelerating the process, and it's hugely important in the process. But having the courage to start opening up about what's happening to you is really probably the place that it starts.
Absolutely.
Mm.
The place that it starts is having the courage to start talking about it.
Yeah.
Even talking about as simple starting as, "Hey, I'm confused. I
Yeah.
think something might be going on, might be holding me back." Start talking
Yeah.
about it, and then slowly pieces will start to come forward and knowledge,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so if somebody is looking for they don't have anybody to talk to, I feel like you and Empowered Survivors could be a
Love to
great
talk
place
to them.
to turn
Ah,
to. Yeah,
absolutely.
where
Yeah.
can people come to find you, and like where is sort of like the intro into your world?
Yeah, the best place to find me is at empoweredsurvivors.com. That's my website. And it is with an S on the end, survivors, because I'm not the only one. There are many of us, and I'm hoping to create more of us, right? Help people become that way. But that's the best place to get me. You can either go to the website or you can drop me an email. My name, Beth at Empowered Survivors, is also a
Yeah.
great way to find me. But yeah, I mean, I would love to chat with any of your listeners who's looking for some help there, because I know how hard it is. And the other thing that I understand about the healing process is I've taken my journey, but each one of us takes our own unique journey. So my journey is not your journey, but I've done enough of this that I can help you to figure out what your journey is. And a lot of that has to do with
Yeah.
what's available to you and what's around you. Right. And so I would love to do that if there's anybody who thinks they can benefit from my help.
Yeah, love it. And, everybody's different, right? So it's great that you're gonna take from your experiences to help people figure out their own
That's
journey.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
empoweredsurvivors.com. And so Beth, as we start to wrap up, I'm curious about what's next, or what's your I mean, we talked about life's mission a little bit earlier. What is the legacy that you think you're trying to leave on this world?
My legacy is to help other survivors of trauma and abuse to heal. And if that's one survivor other than me, or how many ever I'm going to eventually interact with, that's wonderful. But that is the legacy that I will, and I know I will leave in this world. And I'm truly honored to have that legacy before me. It's a wonderful gift.
It's
Yeah.
a wonderful gift. It's
It is.
honestly a blessing to have people like you in this world that are truly
Thank you.
helping others, right? And
Thank you.
creating more empowered survivors, which
Yes. And
is
likewise, people
great.
like you who help us to have people find us. So thank you for your work too. Thank you.
My pleasure. Absolutely. I mean, so as you work to empower more survivors, what's sort of the next step? Like, how can either I or other people help you to empower more people?
Well, you and other people like you can just talk about the fact that I exist in this world and send people to find me. If you think that I can help them, they might benefit from knowing me. That's a huge help. I know part of my work is to be very visible and in large scale ways. I have a book that's coming out in a month, but I have moved past that and I've sort of been told to put that down. It's past history and move on. And so I'm in the launch process right now, but I know I will have a podcast and a YouTube channel coming in the very near future. So my um like having a broad microphone, almost feel like a megaphone, like just like yelling out my healing message, right? That's sort of how I see myself and my place in this world. So, connecting with people who can help me to get that message out broadly, yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah, be great.
And that's a wrap, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I greatly appreciate it. Please help me, help Beth share the episode. We don't have any ads. We don't charge for the podcast. All that we ask is you help us to grow the show. Help us to grow by sharing today's episode with a friend, a family member, or a colleague. It will truly help Beth to empower more survivors and help us to spread the message of so many amazing people in this world that are working to make a difference and leave an amazing legacy. But what did you think about the episode? So good, right? You need to be so in tune to your emotions. Right? She mentioned all of these different signals that you can be feeling in your life. Overarching, if you just have this idea, this concept that something is holding you back that you haven't dealt with, start talking about it. Please tell somebody and then search for knowledge, right? Search for knowledge. You talked about putting the cart before the horse. But if you have the slightest idea something might be holding you back, a great sign, a great place to start. Talk to people. Reach out to Beth if you need a safe space, a friend, a family member, a colleague even as well, and then start to educate yourself and move forward. You've been put on this world for a purpose, a reason. This is all part of your journey, what you're going through today. Keep moving forward. You're doing great and you're bound to do amazing, amazing things. To everybody out there, thank you so much for listening today. I greatly appreciate it. Until next time, my name is Wayne Veldsman, and you've been listening to the Journey to Legacy podcast.